Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our publishing and coaching services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Chris Enss, author of The Pinks. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Are you ready to get started?
I am. Let us go into this wonderful subject of how to write and get published and promote your work.
Sounds like a plan. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Complete the work. There's a lot of people that start it, they never finish it, they get halfway through and decide that they're going to do something else, but you complete the work. And by my saying complete the work, I don't necessarily mean you go chapter 1 till you get to the end. Completing the work means that you hire a good independent editor to proof and fact check your work. It's going to make all the difference between your book getting into a publishing house as opposed to somebody who's never done any of that. And when a publisher picks it up and goes through the first couple of pages and they see a number of mistakes by way of fact or by way of grammatical errors, they will put it aside. So you've got to complete the work.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. One of the best investments that you can make is to outsource your work to an editor, because you're right, done is better than perfect. That's one of the things we always talk about in the show, and that is just get it done and then let an editor clean it up from there and get everything sorted out, but just get the book done.
Right, and you have to be willing to take on the expense of hiring somebody who will do that for you. Now, I have written 44 books, and I use the same editor who does nothing but go through my work and fact checks everything. I primarily write about women of the Old West, and they are all nonfiction pieces, and so it's important that everything be correct. Once in a while, I transpose some numbers. Let's just say that I say something happened in 1856, and I've written 1865. Those things are crucial. They will make all the difference in the world. So I would want to pay somebody to go through and to find those things. You've got to hire an independent person. If you're with a publishing house, I'm with a publishing house, that doesn't necessarily mean that that publishing house, the editors there, will catch those things. My publishing house does over 800 books a year. It's not likely that they're going to catch all the things that you've made a mistake on or that you have messed up on. So you want to be vigilant with that yourself. It's your book. Your name is on it. At the end of the day, it is your work. And all of that's crucial.
Well, and you bring up a great point, too, being able to utilize the same editor, because the one thing about using the same editor for multiple books, and this is what I've learned with my 13 books, is I've had the same editor for all those books. And the great thing is they also get your voice, they understand your tone, and they make sure everything's going to flow correctly. And if something doesn't quite make sense, whether it's fact-checking or just with the story arc, they're going to tell you, hey, there's something here that could be a great area of opportunity for improvement. Let's look at that.
Right, and as I said, it's essential that you have somebody that you trust, somebody that really is in it just to be an editor. Many times, you may have to search to find that person, because there are many editors out there who really want to be a writer. And what they might do is take your book and mark it up and say, I would do this, I would do that, but they're not the writer, they are the editor. And you have to be very specific about what it is that you want them to do. I want you to check these things, check the facts, get in, get out, and that's it.
Absolutely. What do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
I think it's knowing how much of the success of the publication is in the author's hands. You and I spoke about this before we went on the air here with this particular conversation. A lot of authors don't realize that you are going to have to be in charge of making sure this book gets into the right hands. And that's the hardest part about getting published, is being able to sweep away all of those preconceived notion of what it means to be a published author. Because the cold hard facts is you're going to be hustling for your book the same way that the person who self-publishes hustles their book. You always have to be out there having that idea and that goal in mind. How am I going to sell this book? And it's wonderful when you're published. I work with Rowman & Littlefield, and they are a wonderful publishing house, and I feel blessed every day that I get to work for them and with them. But I still have to do the same amount of work for book 44. I'm writing book 45 right now. I still have to do the same amount of work with 45 that I did with book 1 and 2. That's just the cold, hard facts of it. It's not good or bad. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, that's one of the big epiphanies I had with this podcast in particular, when I've talked to so many published authors, and they all brought up that one main challenge, and that is the fact that even going through a traditional publisher, they still expect you to do the lion's share of your marketing. So it's very similar to if you are self-publishing, is that you're going to have to do the marketing. So it's one of those things where you don't get out of it just because you went through a traditional publisher. You're still expected to market and to be able to sell the book. So that was one of the really big things. And the fact that you've done 44 books is incredible. And the fact that you're able to take those strategies and apply those towards each and every one of your books.
Well, I think you have to find what is going to work for you. And you have to brand yourself, and you have to find a niche market. As I say, I write about women of the Old West, which for the most part, a lot of people don't think that women in the Old West did much outside of being soiled doves or school teachers. But really, women filled a variety of roles in settling the West. And I've been able to do a number of books on that subject, and that is my niche, and that is my brand. If I go outside of that and decide that today I'm going to write about science fiction, monsters, and motion pictures, that's outside of my wheelhouse, and I won't be able to, that'll be taking on a whole other area of marketing. And people know when they pick up a book about that Chris Enss has written that it's going to be about women of the Old West.
Well, and speaking of marketing, I'd like for you to please share a marketing strategy that you've used in your book launches that has worked well.
I have a specific plan. What is it that I hope to accomplish with the sale of this particular book? Who do I want to market it to? Do I want to get it to the New York Times bestseller list, or am I going to be comfortable with just selling it on a local, in a local field? Let me give you an example. I wrote a book called The Principles of Posse Management, and that is being able to employ the same methods for managing a business that Western posses had when they went out to catch a criminal. The most successful posses of the Old West subscribe to a pattern of success that can be implemented in work today. That particular book, I could market it to in the field of business, and I could market it in the field of Westerns. And so being able to come up with a plan, how I'm going to market these, or if I'm going to market it on a dual basis, that's what you need to do. You need to focus on what it is that you want to do with this. Some people are just pleased with being able to sell the book to their family. I would never be pleased with that. I want to make a big splash with my books. So, but you have to determine what it is that you're going to be satisfied with, and go into it knowing that. If that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, that does. You really have to tailor it and find the correct niche with that. What are some specific strategies that you have used? Was that to email people on your list? Was it to use different services? What was the actual tools that you utilized when you do launch your books? I utilize a variety of what I call stacking methods. I send out, I do an e-newsletter blast. I also have a book trailer made up. I hire a company that does book trailers, and I send my book trailers out.
I boost that particular listing of my book trailer on Facebook. I boost it on LinkedIn. I boost it on Twitter. I send it out to as many people as I possibly can. I do a number of radio and television interviews. You just stack it. It can't just be one thing that you do. It has to be a variety of things that you do. For example, when I wrote The Principles of Posse Management, I instantly contacted the Stephen Covey's company, who wrote the book, The 7 Principles, The 7 Habits of Most Successful People, and asked them to write the foreword or to give me a quote from my book. They did so, and I got more marketing because they are one of the people who gave me a quote for the back jacket of my book. I also had the CEO of a company called Cowgirl Tough to give me a quote for the back of my book. That again was able to give me some an opportunity to market it in other areas. People that were already established, and you dovetail off of that. So it's not just one particular area. I usually take on 5 different areas that I'm going to focus on, and I adopted that particular principle from Steve Jobs, Steve Jobs, of course, worked for Apple, and then he was fired. Then he was hired back. When he was hired back, he looked at all the things that Apple was doing, and they were doing so many things that he just said, this is too many things. We have to do 5 things, and we have to do those 5 things better than anybody else. That's the principle that you have to have with marketing. I'm going to market, and I'm going to do these 5 stacking principles, and that's what I'm going to focus on. If you go outside of that, then you really are dividing your efforts, and they won't be as honed in and focused as you might want them to be.
Yeah, it's like the 80-20 principle, where you focus on those 20% of things that are going to work well, and that's going to do most of the job. And I couldn't agree more with you. One thing that we do with our marketing strategies is we stack promos on certain days just to build it to a crescendo. And it's very similar to this, with utilizing book trailers and radio and television, reaching out to your list. And I love your strategy about reaching out to Stephen Covey's company to get a quote for the back of your book. And then obviously mentioned Steve Jobs. One of the things that I remembered from him was when he had that Lisa computer come out, and he made it all about all the little technical parts about and all these great things. And of course, it didn't sell well. And then when he went to start with the iPhone and the iPad and everything, he took that storytelling approach, and it was so much more powerful when he utilized that and made everything simplistic versus just focusing on these little technical parts of it.
And that's a good point that you brought up, Paul, because you want to study someone that has great promotional chops. You want to study someone who has that marketing capability that you admire, and adopt those particular things that they are doing in what you do, and not think, well, I've only written a book about dogs. That can't apply here. It can. All of these things that we're saying does apply and can apply. You have to be very smart about what you're doing, and you have to come up with a plan. You have to write your plan out and follow that plan. Sometimes people want to. I've got a really good writer who has written quite a few books on a particular subject, but they can't make up their mind what they want to be when they grow up. They write books on a particular subject that turn out to be really good, and then they decide, what I want to do is I want to do this instead. Well, you don't really know what you want to be when you grow up then, and you have to know. It sounds really simple, but you got to know what you want to be. You can't say I want to be a ballerina and spend all your time trying to be a ballerina and then suddenly decide you want to go and make sandwiches at Subway. There's nothing wrong with that, but what do you want to be?
Absolutely.
You have to decide what you want to be focused and what you want to do when you grow up.
Well, one thing I'd like to touch on a little bit more, too, is you mentioned about utilizing book trailers for your book launch. So you found that to be a really good strategy?
I do. Now, that does not mean, that's the other thing about this, it doesn't mean that what works for me is going to work for everybody else.
Yeah.
You may not find that to be the case. And if that is not the case, then you have to throw it away and not do it. You have to figure out what's going to be good for you to do. Let me just give you an example. I have a friend that wrote this wonderful book called Golden Elixir, the story of the history of whiskey throughout the United States. And what she did was she had coasters made up. And so when she sent out her book and sent it to different saloons and taverns across the United States, she sent it with coasters that had the name of the book and had on the back of that coaster a tailor-made recipe for this great kind of whiskey cocktail drink that she makes. That's a leave behind. Now, that is not necessarily going to work for my stuff because I don't have anything like that. So I couldn't really employ that principle with what I do. You have to figure out what works for you. If a book trailer doesn't work for you, for goodness sake, don't do it.
Well, for those people...
I found that works for me, and that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, for those people that do want to use book trailers, though, what pieces of advice would you give them? Because I have a lot of friends, especially in nonfiction, that love book trailers. Now, personally, I haven't really utilized them very much. It's something I'm looking at potentially down the line. But what are some things that you would suggest as good ideas to use in book trailers, and also who you suggest the type of people we should reach out to create these type of book trailers?
The company I use is called Greed Be Gone, and that's their website, Greed, Greed, Becom, no, Greed Be Gone. So it's Greed, Begone, begone.com. And they're the company that I use, and they are incredible. And what I like to do, since I write books about women of the Old West, and I write about the Old West, I just came out with a book called Cowboys, Creatures, and Classics, The Story of Republic Pictures. So I went through and found clips from the old movies that have no copyright attached to them that I could use when I put together a trailer for the book. And you can go on to, I have a YouTube channel, chrisenss.com. You can go on my website, Chris Enss, which is ChrisEnss.com, and see some of the things that I have used for my book trailers. I wrote a book called The Trials of Annie Oakley, about the life of Annie Oakley in the 6 years that she spent in court suing William Randolph Hearst for defamation of character. I went and found at the Library of Congress footage of Annie Oakley shooting targets. Now, that footage is fair game for me to use because there is no copyright there was no copyright prior to 1920, so all of that is fair game. So I used that to be able to put together a book trailer clip. And so those are the kinds of things that I have been doing. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to do it that way, but I have found that particular method works well, and that company that I work with, their rates are incredibly good, and so I continue to go back to them again and again.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that, because I think a lot of people are looking for ideas about book trailers, and you brought up some great points. I appreciate you sharing that with us. And what I'd like to ask you now is, what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
My favorite book is a book written by a woman by the name of Dorothy Johnson. She wrote a book called The Hanging Tree. Now, I like the book because it is a well-written piece of literature, but mostly what changed me with regards to reading this book is because it is written, this incredible, great, gruesome Western written by a woman by the name of Dorothy Johnson, who also wrote another great Western a lot of people know and heard of. It's called The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. It was made into a movie starring John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart and Lee Marvin. And I gain a great deal of encouragement reading her material because she was a woman in a man's world writing these tough, gritty Westerns who found that her books were then optioned to be motion pictures. And The Hanging Tree was one of those books. She took this incredible idea of a doctor in the Old West and turned it on its head. And anybody that can do that has my immediate respect, but more so because she was a woman in a man's world making it work for her.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
It's a quote that my dad told me years and years ago when I said that I wanted to be a writer. And I kept telling my dad that over and over again. And my dad said, then shut up and write. Because that's what a writer does. A writer writes. It's not talking, it's writing. And it's putting your behind in the seat every day and writing. If it's for an hour, if it's for 8 hours, if it's for 5 minutes, whatever it might be, a writer writes. And then also a writer rewrites, because that's what it is. It's being able to put it down on paper. Lots of people will say they can write, but there's an equal amount of people who won't write at all. They'll just say that they write. And it's not what you say that defines who you are, it's what you do. And as you know, you've written more than 14 books, you say?
13.
And look at you. That's what it is. It's a writer writes. And so that would be, and it's something that I mean, it's very simple. Shut up and write.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times my mom has gave me that same advice. She's like, just shut up and write. Get on with it. Yeah. Get it done.
That's right. Don't talk it to death. Let's see it. Let's see what you can do. I mean, there's so many people in this world who say that they want to write, or say that they want to do whatever it is. You know, I want to be a construction worker or whatever. There's lots of people who will say that they will do it, but getting out there and doing it, that's the hard part. I love when people say, "Oh, that's easier said than done." Everything is easier said than done. It's easier to say I'm going to wash the dishes than to actually do them, but you have to get in there and do it. So there's no getting around just getting your fanny in the seat and getting the work done.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, I want to thank you for being a guest on our show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
If you go to my website, it's chrisenss.com, and that's ChrisEnss.com. You'll also find that same name under my YouTube channel, where you'll see a list, a viewing of all of my book trailers that are there. You can also find me on Facebook at Chris Enss, and be happy to communicate with anybody who wants to talk about writing or whatever question they might have, maybe about women of the Old West. And my books can be found at bookstores everywhere, on Amazon.com, and certainly on my website, chrisenss.com.
Well, Chris, again, thank you for being a guest on this show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so much. Same to you.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how to get your book published with a proven system that works, grab a free copy of my book at getpublishedpodcast.com.